The Huawei P30 Lite isn't a bad device at all, powered by the mid-range Kirin 710 processor with 4GB of RAM and 128GB of onboard storage. But the P series is all about photography, and with the P30 Lite this definitely runs true. This phone is equipped with a 48MP main sensor, as well as an 8MP ultra-wide with a 13mm equivalent focal length. There's also a 2MP depth sensing camera and a 24MP front-facing camera. For £329, it's a good looking spec sheet. These are all very big and impressive numbers, although smartphone photography is almost just as much about the software as it is about the hardware. Before we get going, I'd like to say a big thank you to Direct Mobiles. They have over 24 years of award-winning customer service, so it's truly a great place to look if you're after a good deal on your next phone. Check down in the video description below for a link, or you can search directmobiles.co.uk. As with the other P series phones, the high resolution sensor isn't the default. It will give you a 12MP shot, downsampling from the 48 and involving the data from the other sensors to give you the best possible shot. The normal lens has a 27mm equivalent focal length with an f1.8 aperture. It doesn't have the amazing low light abilities or the super zoom of the P30 and the P30 Pro, but it does have the ultra wide angle lens. In fact, this ultra wide angle lens is a little bit wider than the other two versions. It's a 13mm lens and it does show a little bit more distortion, but with the amount of software processing that goes on with these phones, I am a little bit surprised that there isn't an algorithm in there to deal with it and straighten it out. But I've definitely seen worse, and it is a lot of fun to shoot with such an ultra wide angle lens. The front 24MP camera does seem to be a lot better than some of the front cameras that we've seen in previous Huawei devices, especially in the mid-range. It does seem to be a little bit aggressive with the beautifying effects from default, but that can be turned down. I think the front camera is much improved over previous Huawei phones, so much improved. It's not bad, I mean, check it out. Look at the beauty. Admire the beauty of what you're seeing. It's really not a bad camera at all. Yes, I'm talking about the camera. The camera app is a little bit more sparsely populated than the P30 and the P30 Pro. In fact, there are even a few things missing there from the Mate 20 Lite, which I think is a little bit surprising. On the main screen from left to right, we've got the AR lens, the night mode, portrait mode, photo and video, and then there's the More tab. It's always a little bit worrying when they put the AR lens on the front screen. To me, that should really be under the More tab, as I'm sure it doesn't get used that much for most people. It just lets you record a message as one of these funny characters, as it tracks your facial movements with the front camera. The night mode works fairly well using the AI stabilization to keep the camera still while it takes multiple and long exposures to give you a clean, sharp shot in very dark conditions. Portrait mode is next to that, and it works pretty well using the 2MP depth sensor to blur out the background and isolate your subject. You're obviously not going to get the same level of precision that you get from the P30 Pro with its dedicated time-of-flight sensor, but it does a fairly good job all things considered. Photo is the default shooting mode. If you have the AI switch enabled, then you'll be shooting at 12MP and utilizing the data from all the sensors. But if you want to shoot at 48MP, then click the settings tab at the top, you'll find it there. When you're shooting at 48MP, you're not able to use any kind of effects, so you can't zoom or use the ultra wide angle lens, and there's no HDR or things like portrait mode. But it does deliver a very nice and incredibly detailed photo, very useful if you want to crop in and recompose your image later. The max video resolution is 1080p at 60 frames per second, but you don't really get any stabilization when you're shooting at 60p. However, you get beautifully smooth footage if you stick to 30 frames per second. Tapping on the More tab reveals a whole host of other shooting options. There is a nice Pro mode that gives you control of everything, including the metering, the ISO, the shutter speed, exposure compensation, autofocus and the white balance. ISO ranges from 50 to 3200 and the shutter speed ranges from 1/4000th of a second to 30 seconds. The slow motion function allows you to shoot 720p videos at either 120 frames per second or at 480 frames per second, but for short bursts. Panorama is the usual panoramic mode that you'll find on Huawei smartphones, which is nice and easy to use. Aperture Mode is here under the More tab, which I think really should be on the main screen and replace the AR lens. It's much more useful than that. Use this mode if you want to get those blurry background shots of things rather than people. The portrait mode will not allow you to apply the effect if you point it at things like my cat, for example. The light painting mode is here, which is just a nice and easy way of getting those dramatic long exposure shots. Good for star trails and traffic trails, but you can also use it for things like silky water. HDR is here, although it will be applied automatically if you've got the AI switched on. Timelapse takes a shot every few seconds and then animates them together to deliver you a 720p video file. Filters is just a bunch of filters that you probably would never use. Personally, I'm not really a fan, and it is the same as on pretty much every other Huawei device. Next is 3D Panorama, which gives you a scrollable 360-degree image. I tried it a few times, but I couldn't get it to work properly. Stickers is the usual Huawei collection of stickers that are not very useful. I'm not sure that I will ever use them, but you may do. And lastly, there's the document and the download tab. It takes nice photos. It's a shame that it doesn't have the ultra low light capabilities of the rest of the P30 series. But I suppose a 48 megapixel sensor is a decent compromise. Altogether, it's a nice little package. I know most people will be turning their nose up at this one. I always think that calling a device light is a mistake. I just think it doesn't really imply that it's a quality device. But I've been pleasantly surprised by the P30 Lite. I think it looks really good and has a very good camera system, excellent battery life, and doesn't feel like a cheap phone. If I was to be very critical, and considering that I'm coming from the P30 to this phone, you do notice a slight difference in speed between this and the Kirin 980 powered handsets. It's by no means slow. The Kirin 710 does feel like it is the appropriate processor for a phone like this, but it's just a little something that I noticed. Okay, it's not as cutting edge as the other devices in the P series, but it doesn't feel like a cheap substitute either. You've got that huge 48 megapixel sensor, beautiful stable 1080p video, and probably my favourite thing about this camera is that 13mm lens. Anyway, that's it from me. Thank you for watching my little camera review of the Huawei P30 Lite. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please hit the subscribe button, double tap notifications and smash the like button for me. I've got lots more reviews and comparisons on the way. Thanks for watching, my name's David, and this is Btekt.